All right, so today we are going to demonstrate a circle discussion, which is an awesome technique for teams to have a really, really good conversation. Some research from Harvard, from MIT, and from Google tells us there's a couple of indicators of a successful team. Firstly is above average social sensitivity, which means you're quite empathetic. So Annette, if you show up and you're not having a great time, either at work or in your personal life, I can sense that and ask if you're okay and check in. But hey, what if I'm not so good at that? The first indicator of a great team is hard to change. The second one is really easy. So that's why we're going to practice circle discussions today. The second one is simply shared talk time. So everybody has an equal amount of time to talk. Teams that do that tend to be high performing compared to teams that don't. So the circle discussion is a structure that helps us to do that. And it's super, super simple. The first thing is that there's a few ground rules. Now, when you have time, it is awesome to agree these as a team. As this is a quick demo, I'm going to share some in the chat, and maybe you can give me a thumb, emoji thumb, to let me know if you're happy with those. And if you'd like to add anything, then you can add it in the chat. I'm seeing lots of thumbs, so that's really cool. The second thing that you need is a facilitator. So that's my role today, to facilitate this discussion. And then you need a purpose. So what are we going to discuss? So I'll share that in the chat and I'll read it out. So the purpose of today's discussion is to discuss how Butter might improve its feedback culture. So how can you get even better at sharing feedback with one another? All right, we have the ground rules, we have a facilitator, we have a purpose, and then the one rule really is that one person speaks at a time. We speak in alphabetical order, and when it is your turn to talk, you have just 3 options. You can pass, because maybe you're not sure how you'd like to contribute to the discussion just yet, or maybe you'd like to listen to other people first, so you can pass. Or you can pause, and while you pause, it is still your time. So the next person in the circle cannot talk while you're pausing. The third option is to participate. So that is to share your thoughts on how Butter might improve its feedback culture. And the discussion would come to a close when everybody passes. But today is going to end at 11:30 UK time. So if my alphabet is correct, Adam, please can you start us off by sharing, how do you feel that Butter could improve its feedback culture?
I feel that we can have not templates, but starting points to provide feedback, not only to preempt the person to start thinking about or digesting how to provide good feedback, but to also give a sense of direction for the conversations usually. What do you think, Anna Maria?
Thanks, Adam. Yes, I think that having some prompts for having feedback discussions are going to be very useful. And one other thing that comes to mind is this not waiting to have a feedback moment that we name as such, but getting into the habit of both asking and offering feedback after each tiny interaction that we have, if we have something valuable to say, of course. Annette, what do you think about that?
Thank you, Anna Maria. I completely agree with all points mentioned above. And I would also potentially add a little bit more of a deep dive into how do we actually want to do that. So what is our own personal preference for feeding back, given that we are all different personalities. Cheska, you're up next.
Thanks for that, Annette. Actually, just to add on to that, it's also not being scared of receiving feedback. I think Because a lot of times we think of it in the negative, that it's a critique. For us, we should actually view it as something positive and a bit more to improve yourself and the way you operate within the team. And next up would be Jacob.
Great points that I all agree with. I think one big thing is psychological safety in the team. And if we ever feel that there's a culture brewing of psychological safety not being there, then, well, feedback that and speak up about it and be brave about it, because that's just the key to everything, I think. Next up is Ola.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. Awesome points. I think one other thing that matters is figuring out how people like to get feedback. Some people like getting feedback, in person, on calls or by text. So you have to figure out how does this person want this feedback and give them that way. Yeah. So I think that's one other point. Sam, what do you think?
Thank you, Ola. All I can say is I agree to all the points I have mentioned. So yeah, I'll just pass at this point. So Adam, what do you think?
Yep, I pretty much agree with everything. I do want to add an additional point. It's not just the feedback that's important, but the follow-up. What actionable things can we do to follow up so that it doesn't feel like any of the feedback or conversations falls on deaf ears or just keeps repeating itself? What do you think, Anna Maria?
I think that that's so valuable, because when you give feedback to someone, right, the other person can take the feedback, they can act upon the feedback, or they can simply pack the feedback away if they feel that it's not adding value for them. And in my previous experience with feedback, it was always somehow left in the air. So you never really knew, was it helpful? Did it make a change? And I have no idea how to tackle, but maybe Annette knows.
I think building on the point around the framework, we would be able to somehow set out the pointers, as we mentioned. That could be very much be focused around how we bring in language. So what does language for each of us really mean? What do you think, Jess?
I do agree with everything everyone said. I think everything is super valid and something we can action on. I think what I'd like to add on top of that is we also need to consider that there is positive reinforcement that can be had among the team. It's also giving praise when it's due, rather than just focusing on all the things we can improve. It's also celebrating the things which we are all good at, and I guess being in the same way being very specific about the moments where each of us sort of shine. And what about you, Jacob?
I think one thing on the whole explicitly following up on, I've been in consulting where feedback culture is very rife, and honestly, feedback you get is not always true, and you kind of take in the stuff that you feel is valuable and throw out the stuff that you don't feel is valuable. That's at least how I learned to live with myself with all the feedback I has been getting. So the follow-up should be proactive from people themselves, with hey, this feedback you gave me 3 weeks ago is really good and now I've done this, right? But not to be expected. So just one reflection on that. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I agree with everyone's points. The points that actually hit me the most were that feedback has to be actionable and specific. So you have to narrow it down to the actual issue and come up with suggestions on how to make it better. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I think I wanted to add the point on before giving feedback. I think the person that will give feedback needs to think on how did the issue happen, what could be the possibilities that it happens. Is it an accidental situations, or just basically maybe starting the feedback with a question on how did this happen, just trying to understand the other people that is giving feedback to.